He was old, frail, almost pitiful in appearance. A wiry frame, sunken cheeks, hollow eyes that carried years of decay. His grey moustache twitched when he spoke, his voice soft, almost kind, but behind the disguise of a feeble old man lurked something unspeakable. Albert Fish, the grey man, the Brooklyn vampire, the werewolf of Wisteria, a predator who feasted on the flesh of children, a monster who delighted in suffering. Not just the pain he inflicted, but the fear, the anticipation, the slow, agonizing unraveling of his victims. The kill wasn't the goal, the process was. It started with a knock at the door. A well-dressed old man, soft-spoken, polite. He introduced himself as Mr. Howard and claimed he was looking for workers, a job for their eldest son. That was the lie. But the Budd family welcomed him inside, oblivious to the rot behind his eyes. Then he saw her, Grace Budd, 10 years old, small, delicate, perfect. She smiled at him, and in that moment she was already his. He made up another lie, a birthday party for his niece. He asked if Grace could come. He promised she'd be home before nightfall. They agreed. That was the last time they ever saw her alive. Albert Fish took Grace by the hand, leading her down the street as she skipped beside him, oblivious to the horror awaiting her. He took her to a run-down house, an empty, decaying shell that smelled of dust and death. As they entered, he locked the door behind them. That was the moment it all changed. Grace turned, confusion flickering across her innocent face. She asked when the party would start. There was no party. There was only him. He removed his coat, folding it neatly. Then he reached into his bag. Inside, a knife, a handsaw, and a butcher's cleaver. He told her to remove her clothes. She hesitated. He did not. He forced her down, stripping her small, fragile body. He marvelled at her pale skin, the way her ribs pressed against her flesh. She screamed. He loved it. Then came the rope. He tied her hands behind her back, gagging her to muffle her cries. He took his time, letting the fear settle in, watching the terror in her wide, uncomprehending eyes. Then he took out the knife. The first cut was shallow, teasing. A test. The tip of the blade trailed down her stomach, pressing into her flesh just enough to let a thin line of crimson trickle down. She thrashed. He struck her head hard, dazing her. Then he got to work. He plunged the knife deep, cutting into her belly, feeling the resistance of muscle, the warmth of fresh blood spilling over his hands. He cut her open inch by inch, savouring every sound, every twitch, every agonizing breath. She was still alive. He kept going. He took the cleaver and hacked through her wrists. Her small hands fell to the floor with a wet thud. The body spasmed. She was fading, slipping into the void, but not fast enough. He didn't want it to be fast. He carved her like an animal, slicing away the flesh, separating muscle from bone. When the life finally drained from her, when her body lay still and silent, he leaned in and whispered, "You were perfect." But he wasn't finished. Albert Fish didn't just kill. He consumed. He carried her remains to the kitchen, arranging them like a butcher preparing meat. He selected the finest cuts, her thighs, her buttocks, the softest flesh of her stomach. Then he lit the stove. He cooked her piece by piece. Some he boiled, others he roasted. He seasoned the meat with onions, with carrots, with a touch of salt. He wanted it to be perfect. And then he ate. Mouthful after mouthful, he devoured her. The warm flesh melted on his tongue, rich and tender. The fat sizzled. He chewed slowly, savouring the moment, the taste of innocence reduced to nothing but sustenance. It was the best meal he had ever had. 6 years passed. 6 long, agonizing years for the Budd family, waiting, wondering, hoping. Then the letter arrived, handwritten, deliberate, detailed. Albert Fish described everything, how he lured Grace, how she screamed, how she bled, how he ate her. Every gruesome, sickening detail laid bare. He ended with one final cruelty. She died a virgin. The Budd family was shattered, but they had a clue, and that clue led authorities to Albert Fish. When the police arrived, Fish did not resist. He smiled. He even thanked them. In custody, he confessed to more than 100 crimes, unspeakable acts of torture, mutilation, and cannibalism. He described how he used a paddle lined with nails to beat children until their skin peeled away. How he buried sewing needles deep into his own pelvis for pleasure. How he drank their blood, gnawed on their bones. He claimed to be possessed by the voice of God, a whispering spectre that demanded he spill blood in its name. He was convicted and sentenced to death. January 16, 1936, Sing Sing prison. They strapped him to the electric chair, his frail body swallowed by the leather restraints. But something went wrong. The first jolt wasn't enough. The needles embedded in his groin interfered with the current. It took 2 full surges of electricity before the life finally drained from his body. Even in death, he refused to go easily. His last words, "I don't even know why I'm here." Albert Fish is long gone, but the shadow he cast still lingers. His crimes are spoken of in whispers, his letters hidden away from the public. Even now, decades later, few can stomach the full truth of what he did. A man? No, not a man. A nightmare, a demon in human skin, because monsters aren't just in fairy tales. They live among us. They smile. They offer candy and warm words. And sometimes they invite you to dinner.